Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded farmers market in downtown Phoenix, her worn canvas bag slung over her shoulder. To anyone watching, she appeared to be just another working mother picking up groceries after her shift at the local veterinary clinic. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her clothes were practical rather than fashionable. Nothing about her suggested that she could hit a target at 800 meters in complete darkness. The morning sun cast long shadows between the vendor stalls, as Sarah carefully selected tomatoes, testing their firmness with gentle pressure. Her movements were precise and economical, though she seemed unaware of this herself. When the elderly vendor dropped his calculator, Sarah's hand shot out and caught it before it hit the ground, her reflexes lightning quick. The old man smiled and thanked her, never knowing he had just witnessed the muscle memory of someone trained to react in milliseconds. Sarah's story began 15 years earlier in the mountains of Colorado. She had been Elena Vasquez then, a troubled teenager whose parents had died in a car accident, leaving her in the care of her grandfather. Miguel Vasquez was a quiet man who lived in a cabin surrounded by forest, far from the nearest town. What Elena didn't know was that her grandfather had spent 30 years as a military sniper, serving in conflicts that the government preferred to keep classified. Miguel watched his granddaughter struggle with grief and anger, seeing her potential beneath the pain. Elena was naturally observant, noticing details others missed. She could sit perfectly still for hours while sketching wildlife, and her hand-eye coordination was exceptional. Most importantly, she had the mental discipline that Miguel recognized as essential for his particular skill set. The training began subtly. Miguel started by teaching Elena to shoot cans off fence posts with an old hunting rifle. He told her it was just for hunting, but the exercises he designed were far more sophisticated. Elena learned to control her breathing, to find her natural respiratory pause, and to squeeze the trigger with the pad of her index finger, rather than the joint. Miguel corrected her stance inch by inch, teaching her to make her body a stable platform for the weapon. As months passed, the targets moved farther away. Miguel introduced concepts of wind reading, having Elena observe how grass and leaves moved at different distances. He taught her to estimate range using the MILDOT system, though he called it measuring for hunting. Elena absorbed every lesson with fierce concentration, finding that the precision and focus required helped quiet the chaos in her mind. Miguel's training methods were unconventional but effective. He would have Elena lie motionless in the forest for hours, observing wildlife and learning patience. He taught her to move silently through different types of terrain, to read weather patterns, and to understand how atmospheric conditions affected bullet trajectory. Elena thought she was simply learning to be a better hunter, but Miguel was systematically building the skills of an elite marksman. The psychological aspects of training were just as important as the technical skills. Miguel taught Elena to control her emotions, to remain calm under pressure, and to make split-second decisions. He created scenarios where she had to shoot quickly and accurately while under stress, though he disguised these as hunting challenges. Elena learned to compartmentalize her thoughts, to focus completely on the task at hand, while blocking out distractions. Winter training was particularly intense. Miguel had Elena shooting in snow, rain, and wind, teaching her to compensate for environmental factors. She learned to estimate temperature and humidity by feel, understanding how these conditions would affect her shots. Miguel also taught her fieldcraft, how to remain hidden, how to choose shooting positions, and how to extract from an area without leaving traces. Elena's natural abilities combined with Miguel's expert instruction created something remarkable. By her 18th birthday, she could consistently hit targets at distances that would challenge military snipers. More importantly, she had developed the mental toughness and situational awareness that separated professionals from recreational shooters. Miguel had created a weapon disguised as a young woman, though even he didn't fully understand what he had accomplished. When Elena left for college on a veterinary scholarship, Miguel felt pride mixed with concern. He had given her skills that few people in the world possessed, but he had also burdened her with knowledge that could never be completely forgotten. Elena promised to write, and Miguel watched her drive away, knowing that the quiet girl who had come to live with him was now a formidable force, even if she didn't fully realize it herself. Elena threw herself into her studies, trying to build a normal life far from the mountains and the memories of her training. She met David Martinez in her second year, a kind man studying to be a teacher. They fell in love, married after graduation, and settled in Phoenix, where Elena found work as a veterinary technician. She deliberately chose a peaceful profession, wanting nothing to do with violence or conflict. Years passed quietly. Elena became Sarah, a suburban mother who drove a minivan and attended PTA meetings. She rarely thought about her grandfather's lessons. Though certain habits remained, she always sat facing the door in restaurants, automatically scanned her surroundings when entering new environments, and could estimate distances with uncanny accuracy. David sometimes commented on her exceptional hand-eye coordination, but Sarah would just smile and change the subject. Miguel had made her promise never to speak about their training, saying it was their special secret. Sarah kept that promise, even from her husband. Sometimes, she wondered if she had imagined how skilled she had become, if her memories of impossible shots and perfect accuracy were just the fantasies of a grieving teenager. The woman she had become seemed so different from the intense young girl who could thread a bullet through a keyhole at 200 meters. The veterinary clinic where Sarah worked was located in a busy shopping center, surrounded by other businesses and always full of people. She found comfort in the routine of caring for animals, the predictable challenges of her work, and the simple pleasure of helping creatures who couldn't help themselves. Her colleagues respected her steady competence and gentle manner with both animals and their owners. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the clinic's owner, had hired Sarah 5 years earlier and considered her the best technician she had ever worked with. Sarah had an intuitive understanding of animal behavior and could calm even the most aggressive patients. Her hands were remarkably steady during procedures, and she never seemed to panic in emergency situations. Dr. Chen sometimes wondered about Sarah's background, sensing there was more to her quiet employee than met the eye. Sarah's days followed a comfortable pattern. She arrived at the clinic early, checked on overnight patients, and prepared for the morning's appointments. She assisted with surgeries, administered medications, and comforted anxious pet owners. After work, she would stop at the market, pick up groceries, and return home to help her teenage daughter Emma with homework while preparing dinner for David. This peaceful routine had continued for years, and Sarah had almost convinced herself that her past was truly behind her. The skills Miguel had taught her seemed like artifacts from another life, irrelevant to her current existence. She had no way of knowing that everything was about to change, that a single morning would strip away the carefully constructed normalcy she had built and reveal the deadly competence that lay dormant within her. The market was busier than usual that Thursday morning. Sarah moved through the crowds with unconscious awareness, her eyes automatically tracking movements and assessing potential threats, even as she focused on selecting fresh produce. She had no idea that across town, a situation was developing that would soon require every skill Miguel had taught her, whether she wanted to use them or not. The morning started like any other at Jefferson Elementary School. Children laughed and played in the courtyard, while teachers prepared for another day of classes. Emma Martinez, Sarah's 15-year-old daughter, was visiting the school as part of a high school volunteer program, helping younger students with reading. The building buzzed with the familiar energy of learning and growth, completely unaware that danger was approaching. Marcus Webb had been planning this day for months. A former security guard who had lost his job, and subsequently his apartment, Webb blamed society for his failures. In his twisted mind, the school represented everything he felt had been denied to him. He had spent weeks studying the building's layout, identifying entry points, and timing security patrols. Webb had military training from a brief stint in the Army before his discharge for psychological issues, and he understood tactics and weapons better than most. At 10:30 a.m., Webb entered the school through a maintenance door he had previously compromised. He wore dark clothing and carried a military-style rifle along with additional magazines. His plan was simple and terrible. He intended to cause as much chaos and destruction as possible. Webb moved through the hallways with military precision, his training evident in how he cleared corners and maintained weapon discipline. The first shots echoed through the building at 10:35 a.m. Teachers immediately initiated lockdown procedures, herding children into classrooms and barricading doors. The school's security guard, an elderly man named Jim Patterson, responded bravely, but was outmatched. Webb's superior firepower and tactical knowledge allowed him to quickly gain control of the main corridor, trapping dozens of people in various rooms throughout the building. Emergency services responded within minutes, but Webb had chosen his position well. He had established himself in the central hallway, with clear sight lines to all approaches, making it nearly impossible for police to reach him without significant casualties. The SWAT team set up a perimeter, but their commander quickly realized they were dealing with someone who understood military tactics. Webb had effectively created a fortress within the school. Sarah was finishing her grocery shopping when her phone exploded with notifications. Emergency alerts, text messages from other parents, and finally, a call from David, who was already racing toward the school. Emma was inside Jefferson Elementary, trapped with dozens of other people, while an armed man controlled the building. Sarah dropped her groceries and ran to her car, her heart pounding as fear and adrenaline flooded her system. The drive to the school felt endless, though Sarah covered the distance in record time. Her mind raced as she processed the situation, old instincts beginning to stir despite her attempts to suppress them. She found herself analyzing approach routes, estimating distances, and assessing tactical considerations before catching herself and trying to focus only on reaching her daughter. The careful mental barriers she had built between her past and present were beginning to crumble under extreme stress. The scene at Jefferson Elementary was chaotic. Police cars surrounded the building, their red and blue lights flashing against the morning sun. Ambulances waited nearby, while news vans arrived to broadcast the unfolding tragedy. Parents gathered behind police barriers, many crying as they waited for information about their children. The SWAT commander, Captain Rodriguez, stood near the command vehicle, coordinating with his team while studying building plans. Sarah pushed through the crowd of parents, desperately searching for information about Emma. A police officer told her that the situation was ongoing, that a gunman had barricaded himself inside with numerous hostages. The officer's words seemed to come from far away as Sarah's training automatically began analyzing the tactical situation. She found herself studying the building's architecture, identifying firing positions, and calculating ranges without conscious thought. Captain Rodriguez was facing an impossible situation. Webb had positioned himself perfectly to prevent any standard rescue approach. The SWAT team had eyes on the suspect through school security cameras, but every potential entry route would expose officers to devastating fire from Webb's elevated position. The gunman had already fired several times, though thankfully no one had been seriously injured yet. Rodriguez knew that time was working against them. The longer this continued, the more likely it became that people would die. Webb's voice echoed through the school's PA system as he made demands that seemed designed more to create fear than to be negotiated. He wanted media attention. He wanted to be heard. But mostly he seemed to want to watch people suffer. His military training was evident in how he controlled the situation, using the building's layout to his advantage while maintaining communication with police negotiators. Webb understood that his position was ultimately hopeless, which made him even more dangerous. Sarah watched the tactical situation develop with growing frustration. She could see what the SWAT team was up against, could identify the problems they faced, and worst of all, she could see potential solutions. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her memory, lessons about urban warfare and precision shooting that she had tried to forget. The distance from the surrounding buildings to Webb's position, the wind conditions, the angles of approach. She found herself calculating factors that no suburban mother should understand. David arrived and found Sarah standing apart from the other parents, her expression intense and focused in a way he had never seen before. When he tried to comfort her, she seemed barely aware of his presence. Her eyes were fixed on the school building, studying it with the systematic attention of someone conducting a tactical assessment. David felt a chill of recognition. though he couldn't understand what he was seeing in his wife's behavior. Dr. Chen appeared beside Sarah, having closed the clinic to come support her employee. She noticed the same strange intensity that David had observed, the way Sarah seemed to be processing the situation differently than everyone around her. When Dr. Chen mentioned that Sarah seemed unusually calm for someone whose daughter was in danger, Sarah's response was quietly chilling. Panic doesn't help anyone. You have to see the problem clearly before you can solve it. The standoff continued for 2 hours with no progress. Webb had wounded a teacher who tried to lead children to safety, and his increasingly erratic behavior suggested that his patience was running out. Captain Rodriguez received pressure from his superiors to end the situation, but every tactical option resulted in unacceptable risk to hostages. The building's design and Webb's position created what military analysts would call a nearly perfect defensive scenario. Sarah watched a news helicopter circle overhead and automatically calculated the downward angle to Webb's position. She observed how the wind affected the movement of leaves on nearby trees, estimating speed and direction with unconscious precision. When a SWAT sniper took position on a nearby rooftop, Sarah immediately identified the problems with his shooting angle. The distance was extreme, the target was partially concealed, and the risk of missing was too high with innocent people behind the threat. Emma's voice came through the building's communication system during one of Webb's rants. She was trying to calm younger children, her voice steady despite the terror she must have been feeling. Sarah's composure finally cracked when she heard her daughter's brave words, tears flowing as maternal instinct warred with tactical analysis. The sound of Emma's voice triggered something deeper than training. It awakened the protective fury that Miguel had once warned her about, the dangerous emotion that could make a sniper either very effective or very reckless. The crisis reached a turning point when Webb announced that his patience was ending. He gave police 30 minutes to meet his impossible demands, or he would begin killing hostages systematically. The deadline created urgency that overrode caution, and Sarah watched the SWAT team prepare for a desperate assault that would likely result in multiple casualties. She knew from her grandfather's lessons that sometimes impossible situations required unconventional solutions. Captain Rodriguez was coordinating what amounted to a suicide mission when someone tapped him on the shoulder. He turned to find a small woman in civilian clothes, her eyes steady, and her voice calm, despite the chaos around them. Sarah Martinez looked up at the experienced tactical commander and said words that would change everything. "I think I can help you with this problem." Rodriguez's first instinct was to dismiss the civilian, but something in Sarah's manner made him pause and listen. What Sarah proposed was so audacious that Rodriguez initially thought she was suffering from shock-induced delusion. She wanted access to a sniper rifle and a position that would allow her to engage Webb from an angle his military training hadn't considered. Her knowledge of the tactical situation was immediately apparent, but it was her calm confidence that truly got Rodriguez's attention. Sarah spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had solved similar problems before, though nothing in her background suggested such experience. The clock was ticking toward Webb's deadline, and conventional options had been exhausted. Rodriguez faced a choice between a desperate frontal assault, with guaranteed casualties, and trusting a suburban veterinary technician who claimed she could make an impossible shot. As Sarah quietly explained the technical details of her proposed solution, Rodriguez began to understand that he was speaking with someone whose skills were far beyond what her appearance suggested. Time was running out, and sometimes, the most unlikely solutions were the only ones that worked. Captain Rodriguez stared at Sarah Martinez, trying to process what he was hearing. This ordinary-looking woman was proposing to make a shot that his best snipers had declared impossible. The distance was 847 meters from the only viable position. The target would be partially concealed, and there were innocent people in the background. Rodriguez had 27 years of tactical experience, and he knew that what Sarah was suggesting bordered on fantasy. Yet something in her quiet certainty made him hesitate before dismissing her completely. "Ma'am, with all due respect, this isn't a movie," Rodriguez said carefully. "The shot you're describing requires world-class training and years of experience. My own snipers have looked at this scenario and determined it's too risky. Sarah's response was delivered in the same calm tone. Your snipers are thinking about standard engagement protocols. They're worried about collateral damage because they're using conventional approaches. I'm suggesting something different. 25. Marker. 25. 25. 25. 25. 25. Time was critically short. Webb's deadline was 18 minutes away, and every second brought them closer to a massacre. Rodriguez watched Sarah's face as she explained her understanding of wind patterns, bullet drop calculations, and shooting angles. Her knowledge was too specific and technical to be theoretical. When she mentioned adjusting for the Coriolis effect at extreme range, Rodriguez realized he was listening to someone with genuine expertise. The question was whether her skills matched her knowledge. Dr. Chen stood nearby, listening to her employee speak with authority about subjects no veterinary technician should understand. David was equally confused, seeing a side of his wife that seemed to emerge from nowhere. Sarah had never mentioned military service, had never even gone hunting as far as he knew. Yet she was discussing complex ballistics with a SWAT commander, as if she had been doing it all her life. The revelation was jarring, but Emma's life hung in the balance. Rodriguez made a decision that violated every protocol he knew. If you're serious about this, I need to see credentials, training records, something that proves you know what you're talking about. Sarah's answer was simple. I don't have any official records. My training was private, and the person who taught me is dead. You'll have to decide whether to trust me based on what you observe in the next few minutes. The SWAT sniper, Sergeant Martinez, no relation to Sarah, was positioned on the roof of a building 600 meters from the school. He had been studying the target for over an hour, waiting for a clear shot that never came. Webb was too well protected, and the angle was all wrong. When Rodriguez radioed that a civilian wanted to attempt the shot from a different position, Martinez thought his commander had lost his mind. The position Sarah had identified was even more challenging than his own. Sarah's proposed shooting position was the roof of a water treatment facility 847 meters northeast of the school. The angle would allow her to bypass Webb's cover, but the distance was extreme and the target window was minimal. Rodriguez agreed to let Sarah demonstrate her capabilities, though he remained deeply skeptical. They had 12 minutes left before Webb's deadline. Barely enough time to get into position even if Sarah proved competent. The climb to the water treatment facility roof was faster than Rodriguez expected. Sarah moved with efficiency and confidence, carrying the borrowed rifle like someone completely familiar with such equipment. She set up her shooting position quickly, adjusting for comfort and stability with movements that spoke of long practice. When she requested specific information about wind conditions and atmospheric pressure, Rodriguez began to believe that maybe, impossibly, she might actually know what she was doing. Sarah's hands moved over the rifle with practiced familiarity as she made adjustments to the scope. The weapon was a .308 caliber system similar to what Miguel had trained her on, though with modern refinements she had to adapt to quickly. She checked the bolt action, tested the trigger pull, and examined the ammunition while her mind automatically calculated environmental factors. The old lessons came flooding back as if 15 years had been 15 minutes. Miguel's voice echoed in Sarah's memory as she prepared for the most important shot of her life. She could hear his instructions about breathing control, about finding the natural respiratory pause where the body was perfectly still. She remembered his lessons about mental discipline, about shutting out everything except the target and the task. Most importantly, she recalled his teaching about the zone, that state of perfect focus where time seemed to slow and impossible shots became inevitable. Through the rifle scope, Sarah could see Webb moving in the school corridor. He was wearing body armor, but she had identified a vulnerability that the other snipers had missed. Webb's position gave him protection from conventional angles, but the elevated shooting position Sarah had chosen offered a narrow window. She would have one opportunity, probably lasting no more than 3 seconds, when Webb would be exposed. Missing meant Emma and dozens of other innocent people would die. Rodriguez watched Sarah's preparation with growing amazement. Her breathing became rhythmic and controlled. Her movements, economical and precise. When she asked for specific information about the building's construction and Webb's exact position, her questions demonstrated tactical understanding that impressed even the seasoned commander. Most remarkably, Sarah seemed completely calm, despite the enormous pressure of the situation. The radio crackled with updates from inside the school. Webb was becoming increasingly agitated, and his threats were becoming more specific. He had selected several hostages for execution, including some of the younger children. Emma's voice could be heard occasionally, still trying to comfort the frightened kids around her. Sarah felt her emotional control waver when she heard her daughter. But Miguel's training held firm. Emotion was the enemy of precision, and precision was the only thing that could save Emma now. 8 minutes remained when Sarah announced she was ready. Rodriguez positioned himself with binoculars to observe the target area, though he privately expected to witness either a miracle or a disaster. Sarah's breathing had settled into the pattern Miguel had taught her, and her heart rate had slowed despite the circumstances. She was entering the zone, that state of perfect focus where body and mind functioned as a single, precise instrument. Webb appeared in Sarah's scope, moving through the hallway with military precision. She tracked his movement, waiting for the moment when he would be vulnerable. The shot window would be brief. Webb would step into an open area for perhaps 2 seconds before reaching cover again. Sarah's finger rested lightly on the trigger as she made final calculations for wind drift and bullet drop. At 847 meters, the 308 round would take approximately 1.1 seconds to reach the target. Miguel had taught Sarah that the most important factor in extreme range shooting was not technical skill but mental discipline. The ability to remain perfectly calm under ultimate pressure, to trust in training and execute without hesitation. As Webb moved toward the kill zone, Sarah's world narrowed to include only the target, the crosshairs, and her controlled breathing. Everything else, the chaos around her. Webb stepped into the open area of the corridor, exactly as Sarah had predicted. Time seemed to slow as she found her natural respiratory pause. The moment when her body was perfectly still. The crosshairs settled on the precise point she had selected, accounting for Webb's movement and all environmental factors. Sarah's trigger finger applied steady, increasing pressure until the rifle fired, the shot breaking cleanly at the exact moment of perfect aim. The bullet's flight time felt eternal, though it lasted barely over a second. Rodriguez tracked the round's path through his binoculars, watching as 847 meters disappeared in an instant. Webb was in mid-stride when the bullet struck, hitting him exactly where Sarah had aimed. The impact dropped him immediately, the rifle falling from his hands as he collapsed. After more than 3 hours of terror, the threat was neutralized by a single, impossible shot. The aftermath moved quickly. SWAT teams stormed the building, securing the area and evacuating hostages. Emma emerged with the other survivors, physically unharmed but shaken by her ordeal. Sarah remained on the rooftop for several minutes after the shot, her hands trembling as adrenaline finally overwhelmed her system. The zone had protected her during the critical moment, but now she felt the full emotional impact of what had occurred. Rodriguez found Sarah sitting quietly beside the rifle, staring toward the school where emergency vehicles were evacuating the rescued hostages. When he asked how she had learned to shoot like that, Sarah's answer was simple. "My grandfather taught me." The SWAT commander had dozens of questions about her background and training, but Sarah politely declined to elaborate. Some secrets, she explained, were meant to stay buried. The media coverage of the incident focused on the heroic actions of police and the tragic circumstances that had necessitated intervention. Sarah's role was deliberately minimized in official reports, described only as civilian assistance that had helped resolve the situation. Rodriguez honored Sarah's request for anonymity, understanding that some heroes preferred to remain in the shadows. Emma recovered from her ordeal with the resilience of youth, though she remained curious about her mother's mysterious intervention. Sarah told her daughter that she had helped police with information, nothing more. David was more persistent in his questions, but Sarah remained vague about her specific contributions. The skills Miguel had taught her were returning to dormancy, becoming memories again rather than active capabilities. Dr. Chen observed subtle changes in her employee over the following weeks. Sarah seemed more confident, more self-assured, though she never spoke about the events at the school. When local news ran follow-up stories about the incident, Sarah would quietly change the channel or leave the room. It was clear that she wanted to return to her normal life as quickly as possible. Captain Rodriguez submitted a detailed report about the incident, though he left out many specifics about Sarah's involvement. He had never encountered a civilian with such extraordinary skills, and her desire for privacy intrigued him more than it frustrated him. Rodriguez suspected that Sarah's story was far more complex than she had revealed, but he respected her choice to keep her secrets. Months later, Sarah's life had returned to its familiar rhythm. She worked at the veterinary clinic, shopped at the farmer's market, and helped Emma with homework. To outside observers, she remained the same, quiet, competent woman she had always appeared to be. The rifle skills that had saved dozens of lives were once again dormant, filed away with memories of her grandfather and a childhood in the mountains. Sometimes, when the wind was blowing just right and the light was perfect, Sarah would find herself automatically calculating distances and angles. Miguel's training lived within her still, ready to emerge if circumstances demanded it. But Sarah hoped those skills would never again be needed. She had proven that when pushed to the absolute limit, an ordinary suburban mother could become something extraordinary. That knowledge was both comforting and sobering. Webb survived his wound and was later sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. During his trial, he expressed bewilderment about how he had been shot from what he considered an impossible angle. The official report cited tactical intervention by specialized personnel, and Webb never learned that he had been defeated by a veterinary technician with a secret past. Sarah kept one memento from that terrible day: a small piece of brass, the spent casing from the shot that had ended the crisis. She stored it in a box with photos of Miguel and memories of their time together in the mountains. Emma occasionally asked about her grandfather, and Sarah would share stories of their hunting trips and his patient teaching. She never mentioned that Miguel's lessons had saved Emma's life, but she thought he would have been proud. The shot at Jefferson Elementary became legendary within law enforcement circles, though the details remained classified. At 847 meters under difficult conditions, it represented marksmanship at the highest level. Those few who knew the complete story understood they had witnessed something remarkable: the emergence of skills that most people could never possess, used by someone who wanted nothing more than to return to anonymity. Years passed, and Sarah Martinez continued her quiet life in Phoenix. She had learned that some chapters of life are meant to be closed, that some abilities are better left unused. The woman who could make impossible shots preferred to spend her days healing animals and raising her daughter. But somewhere deep inside, Miguel's training remained, waiting patiently in case the world ever again demanded the ultimate precision that only a true marksman could provide.